All talk in Westminster is about Andy Burnham, the soon-to-be crowned Prime Minister. Labour MPs think he is the answer to their prayers. There's only one person who his nose is out of joint, and that is...
His team banished me to a balcony, and then what really infuriated me is...
And I'm going to call him a mini mank dictator. He is smoke and mirrors. Burnham seems determined to complete the constitutional vandalism that Blair started, and which will ultimately end in the destruction of the United Kingdom.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Expresso. We're with the Tory MP Esther McVey, our very own Westminster whisperer. Est, what's the latest?
Well, all talk in Westminster is about Andy Burnham, the soon-to-be crowned Prime Minister. And as each day goes past, that is more inevitable. So he's untested, he will be uncontested, and he will just be anointed the leader of the country. And Labour MPs think he is the answer to their prayers. They think he's this ordinary guy from Manchester, and they're lapping it up. And there's only one person who his nose is out of joint, and that is Angela Rayner, who really, he's stealing her mantle. She was the ordinary kid from the north, and now he's that. And you're not actually hearing about any jobs that she has got. But at Parliament's a cruel pace. People start to see the patterns that are forming, and you start to get nicknames. So he's in Westminster, but he is invisible. He's not going into the chamber, and he's not asking questions. People will say, oh, maybe it's right not to go into PMQs, not to be there when Starmer's there, but he's not in for anything else. And this invisibility, this staying below the radar, this not having to answer any questions when he will just walk straight in and be Prime Minister, is starting to upset people now. And the other name people have got for him, well, I have, is Mr. Knock and Run. So he'll announce something and disappear. He won't be there to answer any questions on it. He'll just deliver something and disappear. Do you know the game Knock and Run? In the UK, it's where you knock on the neighbour's door, disappear and just irritate them.
So in South Africa, we call that ding-dong ditch because we all have really high walls. So you've got to ring a bell and then run away.
Right. So it's the same thing.
Similar
you irritate.
concept.
So you sort of do what you want to do and disappear from any kind of scrutiny. And we saw this in Manchester this week when he gave his big speech. His big ideas was devolution and a number 10 of the North. But he disappeared without anybody being able to, and the media not being able to ask him any questions. And you were there.
I was in the room, and the second I arrived, his team banished me to a balcony that overlooked the room, really quite far away, so we couldn't ask any questions. And then what really infuriated me is political editors who are the slightly higher above where I am. I'm deputy political editor. They were allowed the honour of sitting at the back of the room.
So somebody who doesn't want, a class system, he's already got one. You are better than him. He is better than you. You are over there.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely no questions were taken from anyone, no matter where they were in the room.
But he also banished people who were sketch writers. He didn't want anybody writing about how he came across, what he talked about. So he had them out as well. And what I also noticed, because I did watch the whole thing, there was rent-a-mob at the front. Everybody cheering and clapping whatever he said. All a load of cliches, a load of sort of nonsense. And that is like, and I'm going to call him a mini mank dictator. So all that you hear is a fawning, and anybody else who could possibly question what he's doing. This is a man who's wanted to be the Prime Minister for 20, 30 years his whole life, and yet he doesn't know what he wants to do and cannot face any scrutiny. I will say that does not bode well. And another reason that he's just knocked and run, he's sort of done that today with his views on Shabir Ahmed, and that is one of the Rochdale rape gang members, some people might see him as senior member, was done for raping 30 children. He's got out of prison today. And then his statement in the press, not in the House, and by the way, we were talking about the Sentencing Act in Parliament today. The rape gang inquiry came up today. It came up on Tuesday, and he was not in the House to talk about that. But today he's talking about it, and he's saying to everybody else, no stone can go unturned. You've got to do absolutely everything. So he hasn't got an idea. He's saying we want to deport the man, but let's leave it to the Home Secretary. Let's leave it to the Foreign Secretary. I'm not going to face any scrutiny, and I'll disappear again. So that's what you'll see him doing. He's also upset quite a few people because I thought, well, hang on, Andy Burnham, you never wanted a full national inquiry. You seem to have been slightly indifferent with your views on the rape gang inquiry. Yes, there was one in Rochdale, but people are also starting to unearth something now called sort of Operation Hexagon, where he, which he is, as the kind of basically police crime commissioner, oversaw what was a new way of doing things. And people said that quietened whistleblowers who were coming forward about the rape gang inquiry.
And there's another issue in his inbox, that of the Defence Investment Plan, which might have a funding black hole of up to £15 billion.
Well, I have to say, when it was announced by Starmer again this week, and people say, why is the outgoing Prime Minister doing this? Was he setting a trap for the man who basically usurped him from his job? And yes, he was. And when I was listening to it, they first of all said there was a £5 billion funding gap. And then there wasn't. Then there was a £10.2 billion that had to be found from savings. And I thought to myself, well, that's not a £5 billion funding gap he's got. He's got £15 billion he has to find. So I didn't really understand why Starmer announced it at all, other than to leave the person who comes next with this difficult situation to prove, well, how was he going to get the money? But equally, we have to ask, where is he going to get the money? Because don't you remember, Rachel Reeves has just done two of the biggest tax budgets ever, got £66 billion through extra tax off people. Supposedly, she gave herself a £22 billion headroom, and yet now they cannot find the £15 billion, which I have to say is a disaster. So where is the money coming from? Can he find that money? And I don't think so. The problem with Andy Burnham, he can't make a difficult decision. Before he was the mayor of Manchester, all he did is spend money and then go to central government to get more money. So Starmer really has left him a test. Well, where are you going to get this money? Are you going to get it from benefits? Are you going to get it from net zero? Are you going to start drilling in the North Sea? Because Andy Burnham pretends to be all things to all people. Some people call him the great pretender. Sometimes he'll pretend he's from Liverpool. Sometimes he'll pretend he comes from Manchester, when really we all know that he comes from a posh village in Cheshire. He is the master of fakery. And I will say that because this is the man who wants to bring in devolution. His only big idea was devolution, right? And I will say, isn't it ironic that the man who pretends to be anti-politics, he's the antithesis of a politician, although he has done nothing other than politics his entire life, is now wanting to pursue devolution, his only big idea, and all that does is bring in another layer of politicians. That's all he's going to do, is find more politicians. So devolution will be an absolute disaster. It will bring gridlock to the country, because all I hear most people say to me now is nothing works in the UK. If I go to my local council, nothing works. I can't get the pavements done. I can't get the paths done. I can't get my planning permission done. I can't get signs done. Councils have stopped working. And yet this man, whose big idea to solve all the woes of this country is to bring in yet another layer of politicians and another layer of bureaucracy and another layer of council.
Everything is digital now, isn't it? Your money, your photos, even your loyalty card at the coffee shop. So there's something quietly brilliant about owning one thing that isn't on a screen. Real gold bullion. The weight of it, the shine, it's just a lovely thing to hold. The Pure Gold Company, which was voted the UK's best gold broker, makes owning physical gold really simple. Tax-free gold coins from the Royal Mint with friendly one-to-one guidance from your first question to final delivery. There's no jargon, no pressure, no call centre queues. It's insured to your door or stored in a secure professional vault. So visit the Pure Gold Company today and tell them JJ sent you.
And devolution isn't a new idea. It was something that Blair started.
Well, he didn't start it, but devolution isn't a new idea. Devolution, well, that goes back to probably about the 1920s, but it was a big idea in the 1970s when they thought, oh, well, should we devolve Scotland and Wales? There was the Act of Wales and Act of Scotland. Margaret Thatcher made sure that pretty much was stopped, although it didn't meet the threshold, so it was. So that was already there. But you are right in that Blair was the one who turbocharged it in the 1990s, brought back devolution for Scotland, brought back devolution for Wales. And this was really a political game he was playing. He wanted to appease his Labour MPs who were frightened of the SNP. So this wasn't really what the public were ever crying out for. This is what he was crying out for. And so I will say Burnham seems determined to complete the constitutional vandalism that Blair started and which will ultimately end in the destruction of the United Kingdom. Remember, Tony Blair said, oh no, we'll let Scotland go, we'll let Wales go, and that will make sure we'll all remain a happy United Kingdom. That didn't happen. Scotland has ever since been calling for votes of independence. And all I will say is, if you think creating a new set of politicians through devolution is the answer, I'm afraid you have got the wrong question. What we need now is growth, we need money, we need entrepreneurs, we don't need the state strangling everything.
And this does have very much EU vibes to it, doesn't it?
Well, it absolutely does. Because what this is saying and what it's looking at England at now, which is what Andy Burnham's wanting to do, spread more devolution across England. We are not a federal country. We are a United Kingdom. We want to make sure all, laws are the same across all parts of the country, and we want to pay. People who want a United Kingdom will fight hard against this. But the idea, and it was very much a prominent theory, again, going back to the 80s and 90s, was the Europe of regions. And what they would do is dismantle every country into regions so they could fundamentally bypass the nation states to go straight to Brussels. And remember, where does Andy Burnham sit on the EU issue?
On EU, is he in, is he out? He does say that he wants to see the UK back in the EU in his lifetime.
Right. And that is probably where he is. I know latterly he said, oh, now that I'm the MP for Makerfield that voted out by 75%, oh, I'm not now, I won't. But he said he would in his lifetime. He's following very much a retread of what Blair did, finishing this off. So I'd say that's what he's looking to do. And I think we need to all hang on a minute here and say, how good has devolution been? Right? This great idea, well, let's look at what happened to Scotland. Just a couple of examples. Scotland, until the late 1990s, was meant to have had the best education system in the world. Now it has dropped right down in the league table. So reading's gone from 6th to 23rd, maths has plunged from 9th to 24th, science has slipped from 10th to 19th. It has had a devastating effect. And why? Because the lefties, the progressive left, didn't want to do traditional teaching of education, didn't want to keep things like the league tables, any kind of rigour and oversight. They were determined to get rid of all that. And that has been what has destroyed the education system in Scotland, even though it gets 9% more payment than the English system. So that's what we've got to look at here. What's gone on? Crime. Scotland, they will say homicide isn't as bad as it were. Maybe it's not, and maybe that's being reflected all across the country, homicides and murder. But sexual crimes up, shoplifting and dishonesty up, cybercrime up, and drugs has rocketed. It has now got the highest drug-related death rate in Europe, and it costs Scotland 5.7 billion annually. So that is what devolution has done to Scotland. I'd say it set it on a path to destruction.
And Wales isn't that much different. So I was in Wales not too long ago looking at the NHS and how healthcare is faring there. And people were desperate to head over just across the border to England for care there because the NHS in Wales wasn't in a great state.
And you are exactly right. Well, look here, spending per person has been and continues to even be 25% higher. But actually, the standards have drastically underperformed according to the IFS.
That's the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
Exactly. And it's 40% longer waits in Wales. So you're right, people want to come across the border to England so they don't have to suffer the Welsh NHS system. And again, on educational standards, it has collapsed for the same reasons, because these progressive lefties didn't want the rigour, didn't want the standards, didn't want the oversight. And that is the problem. And that's what we need to look into. So I will say to you, the public never really wanted devolution. It was politicians who did. Why? Because politicians think the answer to every question is more politicians, more of them, more cost of them. And if we have a quick recap of some of the voting that went on, and if you remember John Prescott, two Jags John, again, you know, the hypocrite there, another working class person, but made sure he did have two Jags and several residencies. He tried to do regional assemblies across the country, and he was going to have it that the first one was going to be in the northeast. 4th of November 2004, only the public voted no by a whopping 77.9%. They did not want it. In fact, it was so huge, the defeat, that they dropped all the other ones, which were for Yorkshire and the Humber and for the North West. So people might say, so how did the Manchester mayor come about? The London one came about because Blair voted for that back in 1999. So that was always there. We had a unique person there for many people, Boris Johnson. He did sort of forge away, but he was always going back to government to get more money. And remember, we've just had a former mayor of Prime Minister. He didn't fare too well. That was Boris Johnson, because he couldn't make difficult decisions, because he kept going back to a government for money. So how did the Manchester mayor come about? Well, it came about something like this. Again, the public didn't want it. It was going to be a city mayor, and this was under David Cameron. In 2012, they were going to give, 10 cities the right to have a mayor. And remember, unfortunately, I hated this, and it's true at the time, Cameron always said he was going to be heir to Blair. Do you remember that? And this was one of the things I think that they were going to put through. Anyway, the result was, by 53.2%, no, we don't want a mayor for Manchester, because the people at the time who were doing very, very well in the city was the council leader, Sir Richard Leese, the chief executive of Manchester, Howard Bernstein, and they were doing very well. So they said, actually, we don't need a new structure. The business people didn't need it. The leaders didn't need it, because they had a dynamic view. In fact, most people will say Andy Burnham is only reaping the rewards of the people who were there before, and massive state, sub-state. So what they did, and I think this is very duplicitous. Once Manchester had said no, and Leeds and Sheffield and Newcastle and Bradford and Wakefield all said no, George Osborne thought he'd bypass the public, not give them another vote, and go to the 10 leaders of the council in the greater Manchester area. And he would do a deal with them, and I will say also a bribe with them as well, to say take over. And this, I will also point out the problems here. You'll start to see with devolution gridlocks. So a Conservative government thought they'd buy off and allow Manchester and 10 regions, right, which 8 out of the 10 that were Labour, they would let them do their own thing. But that ultimately ends up with a push me, pull me across governments there. And it was Thatcher if you remember, the UK then was the sick man of Europe. She was taking over. She said, you know what? We cannot have, like she would have had the Greater London Authority, we cannot have this inner turmoil within the country. We all do need to march in the same direction. We need to take things back nationally to make sure we march forward, not have us all at each other's throats, vying for whatever, and politics everywhere we look.
Andy Burnham will say that Manchester is the ideal.
And I'm sure he will, because at that speech you were at, that you weren't allowed to ask a question, he was talking about Manchesterism for everywhere. But actually, people are now digging into what Burnham has achieved in Manchester. So he hasn't done his affordable homes target. He hasn't done his homelessness target. They're looking into, though, he says, how wonderful the B network is. That is the transport network. Actually, the auditors are questioning that. It is rapidly now becoming a burden. They're paying more for that than anything else. It is in the red. And actually, even, and I will say it, BBC verifier, who loves the left, they are also saying it is incredibly difficult to conclusively prove that Greater Manchester's economic growth is anything to do with the mayor. Because, as I said, the people before, the businesses before, the leaders before were already doing it, had put it on a path to doing brilliantly. And then it was just state subsidies from government. So what I will say Andy Burnham is great at doing is jumping ship when things get difficult. So he left Parliament at a great time to go to Manchester. He'd failed in Parliament, didn't become leader, he went to Manchester. He's now had a great time in Manchester, and he's leaving Manchester as scrutiny is about to fix on him about what he has done and what he hasn't done. And with the policing, just another thing he didn't, like 80,000 crime cases got lost. And of course, he is the effectively the police crime commissioner. So Andy Burnham's ideal doesn't actually come good under close scrutiny.
Well, speaking of scrutiny, a lot of regional local papers have been hollowed out, and there isn't much scrutiny at that local level. That is a very different picture nationally. And Burnham is absolutely going to come under the spotlight here.
Right. Well, I think we can look into a little bit more about that local media, because you hit on a very important point. Whatever the reason, over a long period of time, and whether it was the BBC and the BBC website, whether it was local media, whether it's social media, you're quite right. To find a local journalist is really difficult. To find somebody to come and cover a story is really, really difficult. So he, as a local mayor, Burnham, has never really faced scrutiny. And that's another reason people say, blimey, if you have local mayors, they will be able to do their own thing, and it probably won't be found out for many, many years because they can do their own things. And I wonder, in a way, because he's so not used to scrutiny, which will be the same for every other mayor that there will be in the country, I wonder if that's why he felt he could say to you up in the gallery, Steph, why he could say to all journalists, don't ask me any questions, because he is not used to scrutiny. And I have to say that's one of the few key ways we can keep local government and local mayors to account is that journalistic scrutiny.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of court cases bubbling away in Manchester, so that is something to keep an eye on.
Well, yes, and that is the property stuff, the affordable homes. Something's already gone to the Court of Appeal about how money was moved. Was it a grant? Was it a loan? How did that play out? So that's why I say he's left Manchester just as it gets hot.
Labour MPs have ushered out Starmer. Will Burnham be the answer to their prayers?
Absolutely not. I think he's going to be Starmer on steroids. I think he's going to be much worse. I think people are already seeing he is smoke and mirrors. As people start digging into what he did or didn't do as Manchester Mayor, they'll realise actually he isn't what he say is. He's full of gimmicks, just as the number 10 of the North was. I think he actually is yesterday's man. He is doing everything that Blair didn't quite finish, so he doesn't have new ideas. He is a retread. I look at his clothes and he's 1980s. I look at his cultural reference and he's 1980s. And I look at his music reference and he's 1980s. So I think really they've plumbed for a dud.
There seems to be more charisma there than Starmer
And
had.
that is a low bar. That is a low threshold. I will give you that. Yes, he is. And I think that's what they've fallen for. He's got a little bit more personality. Maybe he can tell a bit more of a joke. But what you've got...
He's definitely on TikTok telling jokes there.
And he shouldn't be. If I had to say something interesting, isn't it? I looked at that and I thought very flippant what he was doing on TikTok. I thought how unserious. And don't you remember those were the words that Starmer used to say all the time to Kemi Badenoch? Oh, you're so unserious. You're not serious. We're part of serious times. There is lots going on. There is wars. There is an economy that's going down the tubes. We need somebody serious. Well, I think we've answered that question there. Burnham isn't serious. I think he looks flaky. I think he looks weak, which we've already seen that he is weak. So, yes, he's got more charisma, but nothing else. We've gone from Mr. Serious to Mr. Flippant. And those patterns of hiding, staying away when things get tough, not allowing anybody to question him, have already started. And you know what's worse? Labour MPs have let him get away with that at the very start of his tenure. When I was in a lift speaking to people who were, oh no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to. I think, it's just right if he gets the job, becomes Prime Minister. Why? Because they just want their job and they're not really interested. So I say the country now is in a very, very difficult situation. His devolution will turn the country against one another. I'm calling him Mr. Gridlock, right? This is not what we need, more politicians. That is not what the country can handle. More cost, less people working and more confusion. And that's where his leadership will go.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you for the great analysis, our very own Westminster Sorcerer. And thank you so much to you at home. Please do like, share, subscribe and hit the hype button.
Right, a quick pause in the podcast to tell you about our sponsor, Incogni. You had those phone calls from numbers you don't recognise, or you go in your inbox and there's emails for stuff you did not sign up for. Well, that's because someone somewhere is selling your private information. That's where today's sponsor comes in, Incogni. They will contact these people who have been taking your information and they'll say, oi, stop, delete it. Go to the website, incogni.com, you type in the details, 2 minutes later, Incogni are sorting it out for you automatically. And because I love you, I've got you a discount. It ain't 10%, it ain't 20, 60% off. 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Just go to incogni.com/Daily Expresso or click the link in the episode description box below.